Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I'm Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. In 2020, I had the pleasure of speaking at Content Marketing World, which is one of the largest content marketing conferences every year. It was virtual, of course, due to the pandemic. And like everyone else, they too had to make some significant changes to their content and the delivery of it. So how does one of the largest content marketing conferences shift their content to better service their attendees, their speakers, and the sponsors? How are they looking at events in the industry going forward? And how are they looking at selecting speakers? We talk a lot about that with Stephanie Stahl, the General Manager of the Content Marketing Institute, as well as the leader of the Content Marketing World Conference. And on this episode, we'll discuss having great content, conference platforms, speakers, grading the speakers, the state of the events industry with virtual, hybrid, and in-person events, Joe Polizzi, Ann Hanley, Robert Rose, juggling and doing handstands for a presentation, sales-driven versus fluffy content, DeVito and Schwarzenegger, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a content world marketer with a marketer from the shark world on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would tell us a little bit about your background, your career to date, and how we got connected together through Content Marketing World.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to join you. So I have been working for Informa, previously UBM, which is the company that owns the Content Marketing Institute, for about 28 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been around the block in publishing, a lot like you. I've had background in publishing, I've had background in content marketing, agency, that sort of thing. So,
and we're both in our very early 30s, which is amazing.
Oh, right.
Yeah, working since we were 4. Yeah.
Of course, 4.5 maybe, but yeah. So about 28 years and part of the Content Marketing Institute since 2016 when UBM acquired that business. And I spent a big portion of my life as a reporter and editor in the technology space, and am now spending all of my brain cells in the content marketing space, which I love because I ran content marketing for UBM. So it was a pretty natural shift once we acquired the Content Marketing Institute.
I had the pleasure of speaking at Content Marketing World, the virtual event in 2020. It's an amazing event in person as well, much bigger and better. But I'd like to know I hate using the word hindsight is 2020 because 2020 is a dirty word to me right now. I want to start hindsight is 2019 maybe is a better one. 2021 is kind of weird right now as well. But if you look back on the event and the changes, especially with the industry, what did you like out of it? What made you feel good about it? Because I think we're all suffering from Zoom fatigue before. Virtual event fatigue is tough. It's just something that sort of naturally fits with that, but there are some really good successes out of it as well.
Absolutely. And we were extremely happy with the event. It was the first time we've done a virtual event on that scale. We do experience with virtual events on a smaller scale. So obviously we went into it with a little bit of apprehension and anxiety, and, everyone had to learn, new platform technologies and roles and responsibilities and that sort of thing. And it suddenly made an in-person face-to-face event feel easy, but we were very happy with the results. We were happy with the fact that we tried to build the event around time zone friendly schedules. It's impossible to make it perfect for the entire world, but we did start early, a little bit early for the West Coasters, but it made it easier for the Europeans, for example. We tried to take that into account, which we feel pretty good about that. We also had a mix of pre-recorded content and live content, and that turned out to be a very good decision. Mostly because we are always at the mercy of the internet, right? And whether or not something is going to happen or there's a glitch. And so we made the decision to have that mix of pre-record plus live. So with most of our keynotes, they were pre-recorded, but they were followed by a live Q&A. That turned out to be a very effective format. We particularly liked our birds of a feather session. Some of them were smaller than others, but the idea to bring a small group or a larger group together for a discussion on topics, among like-minded people were really great. In hindsight, we wish we had done more of those. It was a very nice interactive element. And that was kind of a lesson for us. Okay, more of that in the future. The feedback we got afterwards, people really like that. They like to talk with like-minded people, regardless of industry, about topics that they're passionate about. So that's something we probably will, do more of in the future in the virtual world. So, but overall, we were happy with the format. We were extremely happy with the content. Thank you for being one of our content creators. It was fun.
I understand that my session was the feel good event. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was fun to do. I will say this, the platform was, I speak at a lot of conferences, even the virtual ones now. The platform was outstanding compared to a lot of the ones that I've interacted with as a user, because once that content goes live, I'm a user, not a speaker. And
Right.
just being able to from a UX standpoint, you guys did a really good job with that. And I found that to be much better. But the reason why I asked that question about what you were happy with is you're a larger conference. I mean, there are obviously much bigger, but like a South by Southwest or, one of these massive Dreamforce type conferences, but you're also much bigger than a majority of the marketing conferences that go on throughout the country. And so the way you guys tackled it, I think, was of particular interest to me when I was looking at all the different conferences I was speaking in. And I would tell you that another one of the success stories that I found, and I've told her because I've emailed her about this, was having a good team behind you, especially Andrea, who did a fantastic job. And I was late and I shouldn't have been, but having that support structure is so important. But at the same time, I want to ask you to sort of grade yourself. Where did you see that you fell short?
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair question. I did mention birds of a feather sessions, that sort of live networking ability, and we wish we'd done more of that. We also, had people asking us about more interactive opportunities. There was no chat function, for example, on each of the keynotes. Some people like that, some people don't. I mean, I'm going to be honest. In this virtual world, you can find 50 people who really want that chat function and who hate it. Some speakers love it. Some speakers don't like it, because sometimes conversations can start on, a topic that's completely unrelated to what's going on. But, we do feel that, it would have been better if we had additional interaction, additional options there, either through
And
chat.
again, that's not a fault of your own. Some of that's limiting with the types of platforms and the
It
web
is.
infrastructure. So
It is. I mean, we were limited by the platform to some degree. Like we found the platform to be very intuitive, easy to navigate, beautiful design, thank our creative director, Joe Kalinowski. So, like I say, you can find some people who would love XYZ feature and others who wouldn't use it. There are a lot of people who will say, for example, I want the ability to interact with other attendees, and you need to make it easier for me to see who else is there, which I think is great. What they don't necessarily want is the ability to set up one-on-one meetings. They want that kind of, let me get with a group of like-minded people. I'm not necessarily going to say, hey, Kenneth, I see you on the platform. You want to meet?
right.
That's just not what they're looking for, So I think that's probably the biggest, area.
What was the biggest thing you learned moving heavily into a virtual event for a large audience?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that support team that's so necessary. And Andrea Larrick, our speaker engagement manager, who's phenomenal. And she's also used to speakers showing up on site with a USB drive and saying, here's my presentation. So speakers being late is nothing new to her. So
Patience of Job.
But initially there was a bit of a scramble, when we were trying to figure out, okay, what do we want to do? What platform are we going to use? How much content are we going to have? How many days should it be? For Content Marketing World, we had a little bit of luxury because it was in October. We got to view a lot of virtual events, both outside of our company, but also within Informa. And so we were gathering things all along. What do we love about this? What would we want to change? What are some features we don't like? That sort of thing. Ultimately, we had to get to a point where we had some clearly defined roles and responsibilities, because the person who's normally worrying about catering on site or hotel logistics or meeting with the, the party locations and things like that. Like suddenly the roles weren't defined. And we have such an amazing operations team. I mean, they're incredible. So once we got everything sorted out where, okay, this person's going to do this person's going to do this, and then we would meet regularly. I mean, that's everyone does that, right? Communication is key, but it really was because we were learning along the way. I mean, we had the, I guess, benefit that the platform that we used, the company is also our video on demand provider for years, at Content Marketing World. So we already knew that team. That helped tremendously. We already had an existing relationship, so that made things significantly easier. But we were still learning as we went and trying to figure out what would be the best possible experience. And, it was quite the learning experience. I'll say that. Like I said, it suddenly makes face-to-face events feel kind of easy, and they're not.
No, they're not at all. From an experience standpoint, when you look towards the future now that you've, again, I hate using this word, pivoted in the interim until everybody's vaccinated and the world is safe again, which is in the year 2035. It sometimes feels like, but what do you think the expectation level should be from an attendee's perspective? Because, I take a very heavy focus on customers. And I think that way, especially with conferences. I love the fact that you looked at a bunch of different ones. There's been no shortage of all the events to look at, and you start looking at it through a customer's eyes a lot differently than I think a lot of people do in other forms of business where they try to put on a customer hat. You really do as an attendee of an event, because there's just a natural online break off of that engagement. So you have to look at experience. But what do you think the experience changes that you'll do for an event like this, whether it's in person or virtual? Where do you think the experience bar will be set for attendees in the future? Because there's an expectation that this thing keeps evolving, and that's also going to challenge event planners that run big events to put on a bigger and better show.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, the bells and whistles of a virtual platform are important, right? They're important, but that is not where the experience comes, the great experience comes. It really comes down to the content, which was not surprising for me to say, given my position, but it really, I believe, it really truly does. If you have great content and you have a great format and flow for that content, meaning you're making it easy for people to access that content, that is where the experience comes from. Great speakers, great topics, great delivery, educational content, inspirational content, entertaining content. That is the experience. And then you start there, and then you build around it, and then you say, okay, what's the best platform for this? What's the best platform for fully virtual? What's the best one for hybrid, or a great one? Maybe not the best, but a great one. What bells and whistles do we want to make sure we have? What other features do we want to make sure we include? We're hopeful for a hybrid event this year. Hopeful is about all I can say. So now we have to start thinking about, well, if we gather people in Cleveland, and we know there are going to be, regardless of how safe the world is, there are going to be people who cannot travel, do not want to travel, do not have budget to travel, whatever the case may be. So we got to make sure the experience is still good for those people as well. So that will be our challenge this year. If we go hybrid, who knows? It's too early to say, but we're trying to make it as flexible as possible for people. If they want to get a virtual ticket and upgrade later, if we're face-to-face, if they want to go ahead and sign up for face-to-face, but then switch up to virtual later, that's fine. It's going to be an interesting year, and we'll see how.
Well, it definitely helps when when you talk about the content, you've got Robert Rose and Jay Baer and Ann Hanley. There's so many good speakers at your event that you really, you deliver some world-class talent in the content marketing space. But whether or not we're doing in-person or virtual, has it fundamentally changed the way you're looking at the content for Content Marketing World?
To the degree that we, when you think about a virtual experience, right, it's not simply just taking your face-to-face event and plopping it onto a virtual platform, right? So, we have to take into account things like length of sessions, for example. No one's going to sit for 150 1-hour sessions. They're just not in this digitally immersive world that we're in, so that's a factor, right? So that fundamentally has to change, like how the pacing of the talks go. 20 to 30 minutes is pretty much the tolerance, right? In a virtual, especially if it's a multi-day event. So while our fundamentals on looking for the best content we can have haven't changed, and looking for diverse voices, that hasn't changed. The format and just pacing to keep people interested is where we really have to think, because let's face it, we're all just one click away from doing something else, right? So we have to make sure we've got that approach nailed down.
From a speaker standpoint, are you starting to look at speakers based upon whether or not they're better in person or virtual speakers now? Because you almost get to the point where you feel like a virtual speaker has to juggle and do handstands as opposed to what they do in person. And it's a much different game.
Absolutely. And, to your point, there were some speakers chosen well before, we made this decision to go virtual. And we had some who said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not as comfortable sitting in front of a camera. I don't have a setup. I'd rather be on stage seeing people's reactions. Like that's a big thing for speakers. They want to be able to look people in the eyes, gauge their reaction, and kind of, work their talk based on the audience feel.
Do it all the time.
Yeah. So some people just didn't feel comfortable with that model. We saw, some people, just amazing production work, amazing. We don't have that expectation that every virtual speaker will have the fantastic setup and audio and video and the handstands and wheels, as you say. We tried very hard to ensure that all the speakers had good audio, good video, but most of the audio was such an important thing. We offered editing services as we did test runs, to make sure the background was okay, to make sure things sounded okay.
Another one, you did a video beforehand that one of your speakers did, instructing people how to put their camera. And I don't remember any other conference doing that. And I knew all this, but I still enjoyed watching it. And I thought it was really insightful to give speakers advice on how to be speakers. They could all go Google it, but you tailored it from somebody that content marketing world put out that said, here's how to have a good microphone. And here's an example of one you could buy. And here's how to get the right lighting and a ring light and basic stuff, but still stuff that people needed. Not everybody's an expert at it.
Right.
And I found value in how that was presented and that it was packaged by you, other than you just saying, hey, go click on this link to go watch some random person's video on how to be a better speaker.
He was fantastic. That was Ailey Judge. He was fantastic. So many good tips, especially for, people who aren't as comfortable with the whole idea of presenting on video. We actually shared that more widely within Informa for other event brands because it was so well done. It was just great advice. Obviously there are speakers who are so seasoned and professional and have all the audio and video capabilities you could possibly imagine. But many people were sitting in a home office, a bedroom, a basement, with horrible overhead lighting, and they had to suddenly adjust. And like, what's a ring light? Oh, I need a ring light, So he was very helpful with many of those basics. So we were so appreciative.
So how do you grade speakers differently? It's such a big deal for so many conferences to rate the speakers because that's the feedback you need. But that's, some groups do it through an app, some do it through a piece of paper in hand, some do it with an online survey later. How do you start looking at doing that? Not necessarily to just get numbers, but really to give you feedback that helps you move forward to the next level when you're already in sort of an unknown territory as it is.
Yeah. We did all of ours digitally. We moved away from paper years ago just because sustainability is such an important strategy for us here at Informa. So we did them digitally. And I think there's several important things, but one, we ask for the rating of the speaker, right? So then we're getting a feel for how good was that speaker's presentation, but we also ask for the topic. How do you rate the topic? Because we may want to, look at the topical data and say, okay, so the speaker didn't really get a lot of good feedback, but the topic is important to the audience. So let's look for a different speaker on that topic in the future. I think we will, as we've been evaluating, but as we start selecting speakers for 21, we'll use that data very heavily. I feel like we'll give people a bit of a break, right? Because some people are so much more personable and comfortable when they can stand on a stage and they can, use all kinds of hand movements and look people in the eye and all of that. And they're really good at it. And then when you're just staring at a camera in your quiet home office, it's a little harder. So I feel like we will give people a break, this year, just because it was all new for people, so.
Well, I have a friend who has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers, very well-known name in the space, very well-known, very informative, thoughtful. Virtual presentations puts me to sleep.
Yeah.
And I laughed, and I loved hearing you say that, because I did the same thing watching this person speak and thought, maybe it's just not something that they, I don't look at them differently because they're not doing hula hoop and juggling stuff while doing a virtual presentation, trying to navigate kids and family and, the trash and the neighbors and everything else next door. It's tough for everybody trying to figure out how to be a better virtual speaker. How did you look at sponsors, though? What do you think the expectation is? Because you said this about engagement with the speakers. I personally absolutely love having those conversations after. From a business standpoint, you get leads. From just meeting people, it's fantastic. You go deliver a speech, they hopefully like what you have to say, and then you come talk to a few, either right there outside the stage or out on the floor. Sponsors have an even higher expectation of what they've got to get out of putting their brand in, because especially in the B2B space, for so many of them, that's really where a lot of their lead gen comes from. Now, fairly or unfairly, you're kind of pushed into the space now as the event organizer. How do you evaluate helping them get what they want out of an event? Because obviously it's real tough for them to be able to engage with somebody unless they strictly track a click to their page somewhere.
Right. Yeah. It's truly one of the biggest challenges, I think, for a virtual event.
Yeah. And nobody has the right answer, perfect answer yet. So that's not on you.
And trust me, we've been researching, and, we're trying to, find a few gems, to be honest, to try to make this easier, because it's very much a challenge. It's one thing when you are walking through a big expo hall after you've just left a keynote and you see these beautiful displays and there are friendly people there who are welcoming you and, chat with you. They've got cool stuff to give you. It's just a fun and friendly type of environment. But when you're saying to attendees, hey, we really want you to engage with our sponsors, their portions on the site are here, please be sure to go there. We can't walk them there. We can't hold their hands there. It's so much tougher. And so it's partly the event organizer's responsibility to try to find ways to make that easier and better and get sponsors more involved in, attendee conversations and that sort of thing. The responsibility also falls on the sponsors too, to try creative ways to engage. We had some who
so glad you said that.
Just really active on social media and come to our portal, and we're going to talk about this. We're going to have this person in our virtual booth, and we're going to do this giveaway. I mean, it takes a lot more energy on their part, for sure, but it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. And so we're trying to find better ways to make it easier for attendees to engage with sponsors and sponsors to engage with attendees. And it's a challenge for the whole industry, quite honestly. But, we've been having wonderful conversations with sponsors to hear directly from them, what do they like or what have they liked at other events? What didn't they like? That sort of thing, to see if we can figure out, sort of the magic formula.
there's just little things that are sort of tricks of the trade that I find interesting that they're not pushing themselves to do very often. And again, if there was a secret formula that we all knew how to fix, then everybody would fix it. But it's going to take a collective expectation level setting from not just the event organizers, but the sponsors, the speakers, and even the attendees to some degree, because it's a new world order with whatever we're going through. So other than the content at the event, was there content that you created as part of this virtual process as opposed to in person that you thought, oh, we're seeing where this is really working and we can move this to also an in-person experience? Maybe we didn't do it before as well. Not necessarily the content of the speaker, but in some way that you help promote the show.
Yeah, so we did a few things before our event that I think were very effective. One, we welcomed speakers on our weekly Twitter chats. You know, as a chance for a speaker to get recognition, a chance for us to talk about a topic that, you know, obviously was important enough for us to have a session on at Content Marketing World, and those are highly engaging. We also created a private Facebook group for attendees and speakers for the event, and that made it easier for attendees to get to know other attendees ahead of time, to engage with speakers ahead of time, to ask questions, to just build excitement, to be honest. We also had a very active Slack channel. So we tried to use multiple channels.
Focus on community.
Yeah, to focus on the community, build some excitement, help attendees get to know speakers better, especially some of our newer speakers, you know, not the ones who are necessarily well known. And we're continuing that, you know, every Thursday now on that private Facebook group, we have a discussion about one of the tracks. You know, this week's, topic is on content creation, and we'll invite the speakers in that track. And it's just a way to keep the conversation going. Because, you know, once you attend a virtual event, that quote live week, and you move on to something else, it's hard to think about re-engaging. And so we're trying to keep that going. We're trying to keep the momentum going, and it's been great.
Do you think more of your content will be focused around, I'm going to say, sales and leads and revenue and all that kind of stuff? Because I know I've had this conversation about how, you know, content marketers often get dinged because they've been under the scrutiny with budgets in 2020, and they were before, but especially with COVID, because everybody expects such a direct return on investment with their marketing spend. Do you find, though, that some of your own content for your own show may be geared towards less of the, and I don't want to use the wrong word to be offensive, fluffy content versus sales driven, got to show the return on investment to the CFO kind of content? Have you thought through that at all?
It's a great point. And, you know, I would say like trying to find that balance was pretty imperative regardless of
beforehand. Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty imperative. And, you know, so our demand gen tracks, for example, very popular. Our content strategy track.
Well, that's good, because that's the one I was in.
Yeah. And so trying to find that balance between very practical, how can I leave this event, whether it's online or in Cleveland, how can I leave this event with, you know, 5, 6, 10, whatever ideas that I can implement right away? How can I leave this event with some new ways of thinking, you know, about our strategy? How can I leave this event feeling inspired about what's ahead? I mean, that's the kind of balance we're looking for. And so that's why we try to have a nice mix of very practical, how can I grow my business through content marketing? How can I improve my SEO? What do I need to do to have better podcasts? I mean, very practical, and then also very provocative thought leadership style, inspirational style speakers as well. So, you know, I mean, I think we all have to adapt. I mean, just adapting the topics is important. You know, in 2019, did we think we were going to be talking about how businesses needed to quickly adapt and change because of a global pandemic? No. You know, just, and you know, a bigger focus on diversity and inclusion that was so important for 2020, and it has to be important for 2021 and 2022 and 20. I mean, you know, these are topics that we sort of considered very important for 2020, are topics that we need to consider very important for 2021 as well and beyond.
So this is where the section of the show where we get to know you a little bit better, and I ask some of my ridiculous questions. But I'd like to know, what do you do for fun?
For fun, besides stay at home and,
Yeah, watch the news. Yeah. Living in DC and watching the news. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like to run. It's a little cold in DC right now, but I do like to run. I like to read. Those are my favorite things. My girls, I have two girls who are away at college, so I like it when they come home and we spend time together. But yeah, I mean, my hobbies are really mostly around running and reading.
Well, I ask this of all my guests. It's one of the most important questions I always ask is, what is your favorite kind of shark and why? And I ask that since you're on a shark's perspective with a goofball named Shark.
Well, you know how before we started, we were talking about the hammerhead,
Yeah.
how it can move its eyes around. So we have a lot of animals in our house. My husband's a veterinarian. We have a lot of animals, and birds can do the same thing. We have an Amazon parrot, and they can rotate their eyes in ways that are amazing and amazing to see. And I've always kind of likened that to the sharks that can do that. So I think just because I'm a bird lover, that would be my favorite.
So, Stephanie, it's a special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Okay.
All right. Number 1. This is going to be an odd question, but there's a good context behind it, and that I'll explain in a second. Danny DeVito or Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Danny DeVito.
And I asked that because I know you're a twin.
Yes.
I did my homework. So
research. Yes.
There's not a whole lot of movies about twins, so I had to grasp at the one that was the most obvious.
That's so. You know what's funny about that? My twin sister Melanie, they have this ongoing like prank in their house. They have a Danny DeVito cutout. Don't ask me why, but it's like and it shows up in weird places in there. But it usually scares people. It could be in your back seat. You don't know it. It could be in a closet. But yeah, so there. Those.
Fantastic. All right, number 2. Social media or email? We're going to talk a little bit about content channels for you.
Personally, are we talking personally or from a business standpoint?
You pick. From a podcast standpoint, is that nebulous enough?
I'm going to go with social media.
Okay. Are you saying that from a business standpoint or?
Well, from a business standpoint, email and social media are both great channels, right? For, building your community. From a personal standpoint, there's just so many perspectives and fun and exciting things that you can see on social media, including TikTok. You don't normally.
Damn right. That's been my favorite channel all year.
There's some phenomenal content there.
All right. Number 3. And I will say this from trying to not make this too obvious a setup question, virtual events or in-person events. And I'm asking you that as an attendee, not necessarily as the organizer, but from what an attendee can gather from an event.
In person. Just can't beat the hugs and the camaraderie.
All right. Number 4, Jefferson Memorial or Lincoln Memorial, since you live in the DC area. I love going to both of those. They're
both beautiful, beautiful, beautiful places. I'm going to have to go with Jefferson. I've got a daughter who goes to UVA. So
nice.
Just a tighter connection there. Yeah. They're truly both beautiful places.
Where's the other daughter go?
Virginia Tech.
Oh, wow.
So we support the Virginia schools here.
All right. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits. I grew up in the South and they were both, on the dinner table at every Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving, everything. Like I grew up with eating both of those, but I'm going to go with biscuits.
Not bad. Not a bad answer. So Stephanie, where can people find out more about you, the event, and everything else and then some?
Yeah, contentmarketinginstitute.com is the easiest place to find information about everything we do. My Twitter handle is @editorstahl, STAHL. My email is stephanie.stahl@informa.com. Would love to hear from you.
Stephanie, thank you again for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for your participation in Content Marketing World.
Absolutely. So there was my conversation with Stephanie Stahl, the General Manager of the Content Marketing Institute, as well as the leader of the Content Marketing World Conference. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, let's talk about attendees. For attendees especially, platforms make a real impact. Just think about watching the event. Zoom is easy, for example, and fairly reliable, but so many expect so much more from the interaction in events. Platforms don't make the events, but poor delivery, even if they have great content and great speakers, can be a real concern to me when I watch an event. Luckily, Content Marketing World did very well in 2020 in their platform choice. And I've spoken at some events over the last year where it really felt like the event team didn't pay enough attention to the platforms. So as we move forward with events that include virtual, hybrid, and so on, splurge on your customers with a great platform, whatever it is. And there's so many coming out with so much more functionality and interaction. Platforms don't make it a great show, just like the type of wood on an in-person stage doesn't make it that way. Ultimately, it's about the great content coming from the great speakers, and platforms can make it a lot better. Second, I mentioned having a friend who's a speaker with a big number of followers, great speaker in person, but I saw them speak at a different conference and their virtual presentation fell pretty flat compared to their in-person presentation. Some of that's obvious and somewhat expected, just considering it's virtual. But it simply served as a reminder that none of us as speakers can ever coast, and despite the fact that we were all calling that out early to mid 2020 with virtual shows, we're still seeing it months to a year plus later. We all need to do better as speakers. Our audience deserves it. You deserve it. Third, sponsors continue to have it tough, if not the toughest, for virtual events. To some degree, it takes the sponsors being innovative as well so that conferences and events can help them offer more. Many were not being innovative before when the events were in person. I mean, who needs yet another pin with a startup's logo on it? So be innovative, and like anything else, make your offering, your tchotchke if you will, something worth really wanting. Nobody knows the perfect solution, so if we're going to fall, let's do it quickly and let's fall forward. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so grateful for every listener, and I hope it's the kind of content that keeps you coming back for more and more. Join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.